In this tutorial, we are going to create a user table in the database so that we can store user information. We are also going to learn about hashing passwords, and we're going to use some functions that will do that for us. And the reason we do that is we don't want to store people's actual passwords in our database because we don't want to be responsible if someone looks in the database and finds a bunch of passwords. We want them to find encrypted passwords that won't do them any good on other websites. So let's start out by opening up Flask app. And we're going to add some imports. So from Werkzeug .security, we're going to import check password hash and also generate password hash. All right, next we are going to create a new table for the database. I'll do it right after here, after the song model. So I'm going to create a class that's going to be called user. It's going to be based on DB model, so that means that this is going to be created, it's going to be tied to a database table. So I want a few fields in here, ID for sure, so that's going to be DB column, and it's going to be an integer, and it's going to be the primary key, which means that it's going to be how you can distinguish two different users. No two users are going to have the same ID, and it's just going to automatically increase each time. I'm also going to have a username, and it's going to be a column that is a string. And if you remember from the past video, I put the maximum of the username at 15. So email is going to be another column for string, and I'll set the maximum of 150 for that. That's what I used on the form validator. And then I'm going to store not the password, but the password hash. It's going to be equal to db.column db.string 120 128, and that should be enough to be able to store the hash of any password. Now I'm also going to set a couple of convenience methods, like whenever we have a user, I don't want to have to worry about password hashes, so I'm going to create a method that you can use to set the password for a user. And to be able to do it, remember whenever you have a method inside of a class, the first argument is always going to be self, because it's going to be the user that you're calling this method on. And it's also going to pass in the password. So if I want to set the password for a user, I'm going to set self.password hash. And the way I'm going to get the password hash is I'm going to use that function that I imported earlier from Werkzeug security. So generate the password hash. And that is everything. Now I'm going to create another method, which is for checking a password. This is just a shorter version. I could have just every time set the password hash like this, but this just seems a little easier to read. It's going to be shorter when I have to set passwords for users and when I have to check passwords. Same thing, self and the password that I want to check. And I am going to, in this case, I'm going to return something, a true or a false. So I'm going to return checking the password hash. That's another function that I imported. And I'm going to take the password hash that's been stored, so it's going to be up here in this previous version, and then I'm going to check it against the password that they provided. Alright, so this is my user class that has 4 fields. Because I extended the database model, it's going to be tied to a table in the database, which means if that table doesn't exist, then none of this code is going to work. So the first thing I'm going to do is create those tables in the database. And in a previous lab, I already created this function so that says if name equals main, then create all of the tables for the database. And the way that you can get the name to be main is to run this thing in a bash console. So I'm going to save everything right now, and then I'm going to go to the bash console. And because I have some things in here that I've installed only for Python 3, I'm going to use Python 3.6 runner instead of just Python to run this. So Flask app.py. See if there are any errors. Seems to go well. I'm going to open up another console, and I want to do a database console now, so I can see if the table is actually created. All right, just waiting for it to initialize. First thing is I want to use Mr. C.S. Richardson. The name of the database is my site database. Okay, so I'm using that database. I want to show the tables now, and there is now a user table. So that was successfully created. There shouldn't be anything in it yet. If I want to check, I can see. So select star from user. Yeah, it's empty because I haven't stored any users into it just yet. So let's go back into Flask app. I'm going to import a few more things from Flask. I'm going to import a redirect. So from Flask import a redirect. And then from Flask I'm also going to import URL for. And these redirect is a function that can help you go to a different route, and URL for is something that can get you a link to any route that you need. I'm also going to add something to these validators. So I'm going to add a validation error. This is going to allow me to sort of create my own custom validation for some of the forms. All right. Moving along, I'm going to add a validation to the registration form. So go down. We already did the registration form in a previous tutorial, and we added a few validators like length and things like that. But now I also want to make sure that if someone's registering, that they don't choose a username that's already been chosen. And there's no way you can tell that without sending a request to the server, and the server will look up the new username in the database, and if it already exists, it will say that there's an error and it won't be able to validate. So Flask forms have this nice property that if you ever define a function that's called validate, and then you use the name of one of your fields, like username right here, then you can do a validation and make sure that everything is okay with this username. And the way we're going to be able to tell is we're going to look up the user, we're going to say user, and we're going to query the user table, and we're going to filter by the username being equal to the username that just got provided to us. Now, if this is the first person to choose that username, this is going to return nobody. There's going to be nobody in the database, and this will return none. But if there is someone, so if the user is not none, then we want to say that there's a validation error. So we're going to raise a validation error, and we'll tell them to choose a different name. So please choose a different username. Okay, so now we have our registration form validated. So if someone tries to register with a username that's already been chosen, they're going to get an error message. Now we just have to go and modify. I said we would do this in the last video. We're going to modify this register thing. So instead of just displaying the information that was submitted in the form, we're going to use this information to create a new user, and then we're going to store that in the database. So we're going to say new user is equal to a user, and then I'm going to set all of the information. So the username is going to be equal to whatever was in the form. So I'm going to say the username is equal to the form's username field and then the data. So put a comma right there. The same with the email. I'm going to want to set the email. It's going to be form email data. And then I'm not going to set the password. Remember, I don't set the password because we're not storing the password. But what I am going to do is call a new user, and I'm going to use that method that I created, set password, and I'm going to say form.password.data, and this is going to call the method that we defined up here, set password, and it's going to take the password, it's going to generate a password hash, and then it's going to store the password hash. All right, Now, a couple more things to make sure that that new user gets into the database. You have to create a database session and then add that new user. And then you have to commit the change to the database. Now, once that's done, we want to return a redirect. We don't want the person to stay on the register page because they're done registering, so let's change them to something that's a little more exciting. So let's send them to the home page. So I'm going to get the URL for the home page. So the way this works is this has to match one of your functions. So this matches this function right here. So it would get this URL prefixed with the name of the website. And let's see, where was I? And so if the form is valid, so if the user submits a form and it's valid, it's going to create a new user object, set the password, and then add it to the database and commit that change. And then once all of that's done, it's going to redirect to the home page. All right, let's go ahead and save that. And then we can test this out by going to our register page. Where is it? I think it's here. Let's go back a little bit. Yeah, so let's refresh this. Sure. Wait, did I resubmit the form? I may have resubmitted the form. So this time, I'll do the same thing. I'll use just password for the password, and then I'll click register. And notice, it did the exact same thing. I think I forgot to restart the app. Restart the app. Okay, let's come back to that. Back to that page. And okay, now with the register, I'll use Mike, email me at me.com, and then password for the password, and then I'll click register. Okay, this time it redirected me to the Home tab. So I think that worked. We're going to figure out how to add some better messages to the user in the next tutorial so that they know that they actually registered. But let's go take a look in the MySQL database. So we checked before to see if the user was had anything in it, and it was empty. But now we see that there's one user, Mike, and there's the email. And notice how it doesn't store the password because I just typed in the word password. It stores this jumbled thing, and it will be able to tell in the future if I try to log back in the next tutorial when we create a login page. It will be able to tell whether I've typed the same password in. All right, that's all for this tutorial.